Recording beginning. Live on YouTube. Three, two, one. Going live. Recording beginning. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Live on YouTube. That's good. Hide. Okay, now we're going to initiate record here. One moment. Record on this computer. Oh, all right. And is Veda here? Veda, are you here? No, okay. I'm going to hit pin. Here we go. Okay, good evening. Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Dan Winter of fractalfield.com, FractalU.com, as you know, and Tufan Guven, our co-host, is here. Wave hi, Tufan. Unfortunately, we have a minor little detail here this evening, and that is our guest of honor, Veda Austin, from New Zealand, a very difficult time zone connection, for some reason has not arrived. But we have decided that we're going to be having some fun anyway. Specifically, we're going to be talking about water and water energy and water healing. And that's going to lead to a little conversation about what we mean by ensoulment, which we've talked about before, and we want to put that in context. So if Veda shows up, we're going to go immediately to her presentation on water. But in the meantime, we're going to set the tone for that conversation about energy and water. Now, just a little background here. Remember that with the new equation we have for the radii of hydrogen based on Golden ratio times Planck, it effectively shows that not only is hydrogen itself fractal, but it's a conjugator, which means it's implosive, which means when it's aligned or embedded correctly in an array of bonds, that it can make a connection with much longer waves in a very systematic way. For example, the way hydrogen is embedded at the center of every DNA ladder codon rung, like the center of a zipper. So the lightning down the center of the zipper of the helix in DNA specifically is a zipper that goes through hydrogen as a fractal conjugator, which means an amazing fractal antenna. And similarly, the way hydrogen is bonded in water, it means that if the water is embedded in an array, the context richness or implosive quality, the embedding, the fractality of that array would mean there would be extreme possibility of connectivity to the point where Veda Austin is seeing magic. And so Dan Mack, do you want to ask your question again? Because I think that could set the stage here, actually.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for coming today and sharing all of your consciousness with us. My question is I took a glass Pyrex glass dish, a 9x12, and I put rainwater in it, and then I put it in the freezer on top of a photograph. It was a black and white photograph. I used the black and white photograph because it was photographic paper. I wasn't worried about water or anything damaging it, but it was black and white picture. And I covered the top of the ceramic dish. I put about a 1/4 inch, maybe 5/16 of water all across the bottom. It was level. Put the Pyrex baking dish on top of it, covered that with plastic, and then proceeded to let it freeze. And I checked it. Just kept opening the freezer and checking it and looking. And what I was expecting was a latent image to show up in the ice once the water turned to ice. And I didn't expect a full photographic picture, something, like this. I don't know if you can see that. But I was expecting some form of image. And I believe that I could see light outlines, but in the demonstration that I was shown, obviously this was a YouTube, it actually showed really the transition point in a black and white photography picture, where it's heavy black to light, like say a hill and then the skyline. I was hoping to see more pronounced, definite images. Now, the reason why I'm asking this question is because in alchemy, water has 16 characteristics, actually has more than that, but there are 16 that you can get. And my alchemist teacher took the air of water, and it's a long drawn out process, but he took the air of water, put it in the freezer, and when it froze, it literally had bubbles like 7-Up, like pop, literally bubbles. You couldn't see the bubbles when you put it in there, but when you froze the water, it was just filled with bubbles like Swiss cheese. And then he took the fire of water, put it in the freezer. The fire of water never froze. It did not freeze. Anyway, I'm going to let it go at that. I was just wondering if anybody had done the picture, the water in picture.
Yeah, that's a useful conversation question. And I was hoping we could point a little bit toward what may be the physics here. Remember the context of what Veda Austin is doing so famously, even recently interviewed on Gaia TV, is in the footsteps of Emoto. And, we had a lot of connection with Emoto because our friend Georg Gaup, who ran all the water conferences in Europe, introduced us to Emoto. For example, when both Emoto and I spoke in the IMST water conference in Austria, and then later here in Spain. Now, my impression was that people would arrive with Emoto's work and they would look for science. And they would find that, unfortunately, Emoto was a poet, an artist, and really wouldn't know science if it bit him in the nose. And not that that's bad. As a poet and an artist, he did some amazingly beautiful work. But, then later people wanted to show that this was replicable and therefore use it, for example, to prove that their brand of wine was better than the other brand of wine and all that kind of thing for replicability. And they wanted to pay for that service. And Georg Gaup's son was running Emoto's lab there in Liechtenstein when we were there. And it became clear to me that some understanding of the scientific method and an understanding of a bit of the physics of why this phenomenon was happening was absolutely essential. For example, Emoto had some beautiful results. He would put a seed or a plant, or even, let's say, the leaf of a plant next to the water, and then he would very carefully having the water been exposed to that leaf, remove the leaf, and then freeze the water. And the water would very often show a gorgeous picture of that leaf. It really, and that's on the order of what Veda Austin is doing so powerfully and so beautifully, and is so inspiring. However, without any clue of the physics, the concept of science and replicability wasn't there. And that was, in my view, a serious limitation. For example, then Emoto tried to move the lab to, smack dab in the middle of the ugly city with incredibly horrible electrosmog. And guess what? It didn't work. So obviously, the ambient field effect has everything to do with what's happening in the water. In fact, the water is literally functioning as an antenna for the ambient field effect, obviously. And if the ambient field is full of electrosmog and, Wi-Fi and crap, well, it ain't going to work so good. And so replicability includes having some concept of what the electrical environment is. And that's the point I wanted to make. Another point. My mother, actually, the famous artist, ThelmaWinter.com, and she painted Amish country and nature scenes. And she was famous. She said she never painted anything that wasn't alive, that wasn't life. Now, I was actually inspired by that, and I began to think about this. Almost everything that Veda Austin and these people have used actually is some form of life, a leaf, a plant, a flower, a fruit, that would then send energy into that water. Now, remember, we just said that the water atom, the hydrogen atom in the water, is an amazing implosive conjugate antenna. Gorgeous for picking up a very weak electric field. In fact, it is the kind of what we call conjugate or implosive antenna, like the clathrate cage of the water in a dodecahedron. It's a great conjugator, which means it can pick up the longitudinal array, and the compression present in a longitudinal array, we have made clear, is the physics of why seeds germinate. They need to be centripetal. And so the compression of longitudinal wave components is what is, for example, contributes to the fact that Therify, a longitudinal wave generator, triggers seed germination so dramatically. So I'm just guessing here, Dan Mack, but I would, suggest repeating some of that experiment. Um, and Veda gives very specific instructions about letting just a thin film of that water, and it needs to be real, fresh, living water. And chlorine water, not so good. So you got real, fresh, living water, and then it's very still, and it's been exposed very carefully and systematically to some form of life. And the form of life then has that residual effect. Literally, remember the phantom leaf effect? You tear the leaf off, you take the Kirlian photograph, and the rest of the leaf is still there. Well, that residual field is a longitudinal array, and the water molecules are picking up that array and forming their shape based on the living field effect. So then we have a whole range of issues we need to deal with if we want to achieve replicability and therefore science, which is reduced electrosmog, a stable electric environment. And then we want to introduce in a replicable way something that has a great deal of life force so that it's literally imprinted predictably on the liquid matrix of the water molecules. So I won't say I was critical of Emoto, because Emoto inspired so many people and truly a beautiful and poetic thing. But when scientists would arrive at Emoto's lectures, they would invariably walk away disappointed because the concept of what was science just doesn't exist inside his head, actually. And so the issue of replicability and mechanism wasn't there. Whereas I think now we could talk far more accurately about the physics of what's happening when a thin film of water freezing in a very quiet and ordered electrical environment will record the residual electric field of any strong form of life that it was recently exposed to. A prayer, a leaf, a piece of fruit. It will record that residual field because it's an antenna for the longitudinal array. So that was my little contribution to these conversations we used to have with Emoto's friends for many years. They recorded the effect of prayer on water, and it was beautiful. And in some ways, they were able to replicate that. I just think now we can talk in far more detail about the electrical engineering of what's at work here and do this in an empowered way. For example, that famous book, I forget the author, who was documenting the physics of prayer, and they'd have two pots of seeds on the windowsill, and they'd have the children pray to one pot of seeds and not to the other, and send love here and not there. And it was dramatic when the children were sending love to seeds. Oh yeah, that is a replicable experiment. Children sending love to seeds has a dramatic effect, for sure. That is a replicable experiment. So who here is going to explain the physics? Actually, I would like to just to say that it has been measured that focused human attention causes electric fields to implode or compress. That's Bill Tiller's famous work, Conscious Acts of Creation. So we know for sure that focused attention, hint, prayer, creates a centripetal field. And we know for sure that a centripetal field will dramatically serve seed germination. So in some ways, and the other thing we could say by implication, and then I'm going to turn this over to a dialogue here, since it does appear that Veda isn't joining us. We'll have to do Veda another time. But while we're talking about water, I have another issue that I want to get on my high horse. I mean, my soapbox about, if you want to bear with me for just another minute here, and that is, so we know that prayer will affect seed growth. This is old news. I think it was Larry, what's his name? Do you remember the name? The guy who wrote the famous book on the physics of prayer. There's lots of experiments. It's very famous work. But very few people made the electrical connection to the physics of why focused human attention has an effect on seed growth. And that is a concept which I would like to extend in this little introduction dialogue here, because I feel so strongly that we as a planet are moving rapidly, and I mean rapidly, toward children with no soul. And I mean that as an electrical engineer, that once electrical engineers can talk about and measure what it means to have a soul, everything changes. I was watching this program. I'm not even going to mention the author on Gaia TV. And, this very famous scientist, real famous, I'm not mentioning his name. He's going on and on and on about the future is, we're going to have biologic implants and we're going to Mars and we're going to the moon and we're settling on other planets and we're going to figure out gravity. But at every point in the conversation, every experience, he was projecting for the human condition for the next X number of decades was about get on board this machine and this metal object and go live in a metal building and a metal planet and a metal, and all our children are going to be living in metal boxes on the moon and Mars. And ain't that wonderful? Well, you know what? I think it ain't wonderful. And you know why? Because that scientist did not know what a soul is. And that scientist did not know what the evolution of consciousness is electrically. And this is a problem. Yeah, here I am. I'm on my soapbox now, I admit it. But we had a guy showing up here at the house the other day. He says, I'm an expert at AI. And I says, do you have a clue what a soul is? Hell no. So, all the kids are there worshiping their AI. Oh, this is the future. AI is the future. And yes, we want to live in metal boxes on a metal planet and a metal, oh shit. And every one of the kids in that vision of the future is not going to lucid dream, and they're going to lose their soul, literally, because you know what makes a soul? And this actually is the physics of what defines evolution. Hello, let's understand the physics of what defines evolution, the birth of soul in humans, very, very specifically. So here's the physics. During the process, when DNA is exposed to systematic and fractal compression, sometimes called human bliss. You're sitting on a sacred site, you're in a cathedral, you're having a eureka moment. You just thought of pure principle. What happens is that the systematic centripetal and longitudinal compression of the real physics of bliss, and I've made a dozen documentaries on the physics of Kundalini, it is absolutely a compression event. It feels like lightning is compressing in your spine liquid. So if I'm some way, I'm going to claim to be an expert in this field. So what happens is the DNA itself recursively braids centripetal. The DNA helix, as you know, is a ratchet of 10 ratchets of a dodeca up a helix, and that thread is then braided by the phonon coherence, the sound wave of heart coherence and brain coherence, golden ratio based implosive centripetal phonon, the exact harmonics that we feed Therify.net and piezofire.com, that implosive infrasound, which is the golden ratio harmonics of the Schumann cascade, which is the ultimate bliss binaural sound beat, which is the ultimate implosion sound. Those exact frequencies of bliss phonon sounds from your heart, from your spine liquid, and from your breath, and they all fit the same array. They braid, implode your blood, your DNA. It goes, and it recursively braids rather tightly. It literally implodes. It's happening in your spine liquid pump. It's happening in your glands, and it's happening in the braid in your DNA. And that implosive compression squeezes, and I do mean squeezes, like a toothpaste tube, the vortex. It's a caduceus shape where the transverse wave goes down that caduceus shape to the tip of the toothpaste tube, which is Planck. Golden ratio times powers of Planck, planckfire.com, and squeezes out a coherent longitudinal wave electromagnetically, sometimes called scalar. And that coherent longitudinal, we have the proof. We have the proof. We have the proof. You trigger that coherent longitudinal, you absolutely trigger lucid dreaming. Therify.net and the university literature has now published the frequencies that trigger lucid dreaming. Guess what? Implosive compression. And by the way, those same frequencies, low frequency, phase conjugate pump wave, phonon implosion in the brainwave harmonics, you teach kids those. And so not only do they begin to see without their eyes, see with their eyes closed, but then they begin rather soon thereafter to begin seeing their ancestors. That means that implosive squeezing in the brainwave down the vortex, the only real physics of consciousness, the liquid crystal vortex, plasma, superfluid inside your head, that tornado is the physics of consciousness, is what you take with you when you lucid dream, and is what you take with you when you die. That vortex. It's specific, it's real, it's electrical, and it's a physics of consciousness. And hint, this is a clue to the physics of soul. So now that we know that the ancestors live in that array, the Olmecs making, phase conjugate mirrors to make phone calls to ancestors, and the coding on the bottom of Nostradamus' scrying cup, it's all the same physics. So that longitudinal array, the song line, the dreaming track, whatever language you want to use, the collective unconscious, that is an array, the Champs-Élysées. So why am I so upset about these future vision engineers saying, oh, our children need to grow up and live in metal boxes on metal planets in metal colonies? And oh, shit, man, that's not the future. No, the future is when your children can grow up to lucid dream and their electric field gets big enough to steer tornadoes and stars. That's the evolution of consciousness. This business of telling kids they got to grow up and put a metal implant in their head and live in a metal box in a metal city, oh, shit. No, their aura is not going to grow. And that is the opposite of the evolution of consciousness. So I say to you that anybody that says they're visioning the future and doesn't have a clue what the physics of soul is, what the physics of what you take with you when you die, does not understand evolution at all and doesn't deserve to be telling kids what the vision of the future should be. Anyway, I'm getting off my high horse now. Yeah.
While we are waiting for Veda, I thought maybe it could be a good idea to also briefly talk about Victor Schauberger, who is, the pioneer in the development of the understanding of the qualities of water. And we all know that you have extensive experience and information on that. You have also developed his understanding with your equations and developed your water technologies. Would you give a couple of sentences about Victor Schauberger's intuitive sciences on water?
Maybe I got too loud on my soapbox. Yeah, I really am passionate about this, that, the kids ain't going to grow up to know what it is to have a soul unless somebody tells them. And all these people tell them, just stick with your nose in your damn computer, living in metal boxes and electrosmog. And guess what? Your soul is going away because no one told you. Oops. Yeah. But Tufan is very correct here that this is identical with the physics of what Schauberger is teaching. Actually, Tufan, we have a beautiful slideshow on the vortex of physics of Schauberger for next week. Next week coming up, we have theimploder.com technologies with Jason Matozo, fractalwater.com, and myself, and the story of the imploder and implosion in water. And that story starts with Schauberger, and there's a gorgeous slideshow, and that's coming up in a week. But in the meantime, Tufan's suggestion is still very appropriate. So remember, I said to you just now, the only physics of consciousness, the real physics of consciousness, everything else is bullshit. All right, I told you right here, the only real physics of consciousness is a charged superfluid vortex that forms inside the synapses of your head, but is able to travel outside the synapses of your head. That is the physics of consciousness. It's a charged superfluid tornado vortex. And when that vortex is implosive and gets more and more centripetal, then you become powerful. You have a soul. You have something that can lucid dream, which predicts whether you will take memory through death, because the implosion of that vortex, superfluid of charge in the synaptic array inside your head, which you can then take outside your head for predictable physics reasons. And we know, by the way, is don't try to take it outside your head in an aluminum box because it'll kill you. Hello. So that plasma superfluid vortex inside your head is exactly instructed by the physics of what Schauberger was doing. So what Schauberger did he had a vortex. Now you take, really living charged water from nature ideally, and then you want a piezoelectric rock powder dissolved in that water if possible to make it highly piezo, just like the biodynamic potentization for the Steiner biodynamics does. And now you've got a vortex in that water. And now, when I was in Jonathan and Dolly's lab, their implosion lab in Plymouth, UK, there was a flat spinner impeller at 50,000 RPM, and that vortex would then implode so much that a bright blue ball of fire would form outside that water vortex. I mean, this was real. And then you set that on a polluted body of water, and the polluted body of water suddenly clarifies. Implosive charge. So, but specifically what Schauberger was doing was then that implosion would drive the capacitance in the vortex from transverse through the center of the squirt gun tornado toothpaste tube and project it out into a more aligned, coherent, called longitudinal EMF array, sometimes incorrectly called frill or scalar, the wrong word. Frill, hi, Dan Willis, frill is the wrong word. It's projected directional longitudinal EMF. Let's be clear. So now that longitudinal wave emerging from the center of that vortex means Schauberger's vortex would then begin spontaneously getting colder, famously. And now my book, Origin of Negentropy, explains exactly why, because onset of negentropy, self-organization, is the opposite of heat. Hello. And so spontaneously getting colder was a very good sign. And then simultaneous with the moment it spontaneously began getting colder, there would be a dramatic voltage difference, hint, power from gravity, between the narrow point and the widest point of that piezoelectric vortex. And you harness that voltage, and you have a rather powerful generator. In fact, Hitler wrote the check when they measured how much power Schauberger was making. But the other thing that's kind of fun about that vortex was, oh, by the way, he was making gravity, the repulsing. Well, the reason he was making gravity is when you spit out coherent longitudinal EMF in a asymmetric direction, that's called propulsion. Well, after you know that the only definition of gravity waves is coherent longitudinal EMF per Tom Bearden's equation in his book Gravitobiology. So you spit out coherent directional longitudinal EMF asymmetrically in one direction. That's called electrogravitics. In fact, it's the very definition of gravity making. So anywho, yeah, Schauberger's vortex leads us to lots of fun questions.
We have a couple of questions if you would like to go over.
Are we having fun yet? No, please do. Please do.
Then we have a couple of questions. The first one is from Guilemansky. He asks if it is okay to talk about the phi cup he made based on the water imploded and your equations. Remember the ceramic phi Grail cup?
Yes.
So would you like to give some word to Guile about it?
Well, do you have a picture handy?
Why don't you
there it
unmute
is.
yourself, Guile?
Okay. Well, here, let's put a pin. So if you would unmute yourself. I'll put the pin on you. There we go. Okay. Now show that cup again. Okay. Yes. Beautiful. Okay. So that's right. So if you take a golden spiral down that 60-degree cone and revolve it in 3D, which we did, in computer at the Grail animation, but here we have our wonderful heroic friend who did that with ceramics. And you see, the idea is the little cup inside the cup in the center of the cup, in the center of the cup, in the center of the cup, recursively fractal. This could be a 3D fractal.
So this is the exact Grail geometry that
Yes.
Guile worked on with the exact equations.
The two L's make a K sound, so Gishe. And yeah, absolutely. I used the video you made was actually one of the, I think not even a 2-minute video or something like that.
Yes.
Was part that inspiration. And I hope you don't mind, but I took a copy of that and sent that to get a 3D image, 3D cup, and then I made a plaster mold out of it so I could make these. My friend, well, actually, it's my baby's mama. That's she's a ceramist, and so part of the reason why I thought that this would be best in ceramic was that I was giving people. I'm a biofield tuner, and I was giving people at home water from the imploder, but I couldn't give them the imploder to take home so they could keep having clean water on hand. So I thought, all right, well, how do I can give them a bottle of water, here, take this with you, a couple of liters, but that's only what, a day or two? And so that's kind of what was the inspiration behind how do I put this in people's hands? And
beautiful.
Yeah. So as above, so below.
Exactly.
So a cup in the cup.
A cup in the cup. A 3D fractal, yes. And just a couple thoughts that actually, in theory, that is fractality in 3D. It's beautiful. You could eventually, for example, play with the content of the ceramic. For example, if the ceramic is made of the higher dielectric material, certain clays are more higher dielectric, trace mineral rich, or piezo. So if you have high piezo and high dielectric, you get more capacitive implosion and bioactivity.
Get about 10% quartz in here.
Aha, cool.
And I'm gonna grab an older one. So this is kind of an older one. The reason I wanted to show it is because obviously the walls are a lot thicker, but you could also tell on like the inside, the dome on the inside isn't quite as nice because the extra thickness.
Right. A dimple in a dimple
comes into play as well. And so I'm hoping it comes out, but if you guys could see, there's a little like lines on the inside, and these lines are actually there you go, a little shiny.
Yep.
So that shiny is a gold glaze that I used.
Nice.
I don't have any of the full-on gold that turned into like almost a purple gold kind of look to it.
Yes.
But I am hoping to send you some of the new ones of this, the all gold, and then just a basic one as well. So you guys, both you and Tufan, could take a look and maybe do some measurements. I don't have any tools other than my forks and
Kelly asks where would she buy that ceramic dish? Do you have a website or contact details that you can share?
Kind of. I'm still in the process of trying to figure out how to get him to make mass. I'll put it in I'll put my email down if you're more interested.
Yeah, and on a future occasion, we can help you share. We can call it the Ceramic Grail Cup.
Guiche not Guillermo at bio.
Right.
And then
if you set up a website or something, we would share it on our social media.
Yeah, we can help you share that. In fact, Tufan is sharing geometric models, and that's beautiful. And I wanted to just suggest that, remember when we first started measuring Lifeforce, we were using a real gold, which required to be baked on the real gold. And you can feel that there's a negative ion wind coming from that. And I think in your Grail cup shape, you would have even greater bioactivity. But this was then key when we wanted to measure the life force in an egg or a tomato. We actually used this device, which would be analogous to yours as well. And we used a flameinmind.com life force measure. So if you have a very hyper quiet environment, sometimes you have to turn the main circuit breaker off. But then if you spectrum analyze 1 microvolt coming from here, like we do a brainwave, you can tell a fresh egg from a dead one by the charge radiance, literally the life force measure. And if this egg were more fractal, in your case, it would even work better, I'm sure. So it's a beautiful metaphor. Thank you. And I just wanted to explain that the shape that we did at goldenmean.info/grail, that 3D animation that you began with there, that is simply the golden mean spiral on the 60-degree cone that links the concentric dodeca icosahedondeca. So from here to here is literally a 60-degree cone. And that conic angle, that cone in that dish right there, that's a 60-degree cone, which is in the face, every face of that dodeca in the stellate dodeca 3D fractal star mother. So you take a golden spiral down that cone and then revolve it. That's how we got the world's most accurate animation of the origin of the Holy Grail, actually, goldenmean.info/Grail, and that relates to the shape of that cup within a cup, the 3D fractal ceramic. And indeed, if the ceramic was high dielectric, and if there was a gold coating, eventually you'd get life. It would be alive.
I can't talk to that because I don't have any way of testing for it, but I can tell you that, like, so I made a bigger one because I drink a tea out of this called mate. And this is just a basic glaze, but there's a definite difference in the flavor that comes out. I am hoping eventually to make a full-on, using the same kind of design, the model, to make this into production.
Yeah,
make a 3 from there, because it's like literally twice the volume. So,
and you would see a difference in the taste of the wine. And there's some evidence that, and they have orgone devices to do that.
Everything. And when I use it with the tuning forks, I use it like just the tuning fork on the chest, and then I'll put like the big mouth, and then I'll also flip it so people can kind of get a feel on using the small mouth. And it feels like on here, it feels like it expands so much more. And then when I put it this way, it feels like it's like drilling through and going, you can feel it in the backbone. Everyone mentions that it's a lot more focused, the energy.
Yeah, so we could call this sacred ceramics. You're on a good path. We can help you create interest and demand. It's a beautiful thing. Thank you.
I know that I know there needs to be demand, because I think it's just an awesome tool.
Yeah.
And there are people that work with Reiki and things like that, and they're able to channel their energy like almost. And some of the other things I find fascinating about it is just the difference in the taste. Amazing.
Yeah, exactly. You focus Lifeforce in the liquid.
I can see vortices collecting when I'm dropping down with the biofield tuners.
Nice.
Yeah, the trouble I'm having, I see a bunch of comments like, I want one. So I'd really want to help you guys. I want to get into you. I do, promise.
It's cooking. Well, that's great.
So we're gonna have your email address in our YouTube video description, hopefully, and people can reach you about those.
Yes.
Yeah, I live in Uruguay, so like the shipping, the cost ratio is absolutely ridiculous. I am trying to find a way to find someone that I can send a bunch of them to, and then they could distribute it.
And maybe Tufan could help you. Geometricmodels.org. There we go.
Yeah, I was actually emailing Tufan.
Yeah,
that's how I read.
We have been in contact. Maybe we could get some to friends for our conference in September.
Oh no, I'm thinking at least 4, so you get a clear, a color, a spiral, and also just straight gold.
That's great.
You guys could play with, and as soon as they get out of the oven, hopefully early this month, I'm gonna put those in a box for you, so you guys can play. And
wonderful.
I would appreciate your feedback.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're excited. I see that Aircrete Harry is showing some pictures. Should we give a chance to Aircrete Harry? So speaking of charge-rich ceramics and cement plans, Aircrete, did you want to do a quick? I see.
Yeah. Let me see.
I'll put the pin on you.
Okay.
Just show the pictures you shared in the chat. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just now did the owl. I put the petri dish on top of the image. This is the image here. Oh, I can't see it. Anyway, that's the image. And I just put that on top and put it in the freezer. And I put my intent on it. While I was listening, I was thinking of the image and, embedding in the water. And so that was what I just now did. And a few days ago, if you look in the chat earlier, you see I did one with a bird. And you can see the bird. I can see it looks like the image. Not exact, but it's this water thing. So
can you show those pictures? Because some people can't see the chat.
Share it. Yeah, okay, it'll be easier. I'll share
Yeah.
it.
So Aircrete Harry, remember, he's the genius of magic energized concrete and living cement. And he's been with us for a long time. He's quite an amazing craftsman. And so he just demonstrated the principle in the fluid storing the image here. He's going to bring up that image in just a second. So Aircrete Harry uses vortex forms in concrete, etc.
And the water I used was imploded water.
There you
Okay,
go.
so it's coming up. I'll organize my images real quick. Okay, I'm ready. Okay, share.
Oh, that's cool. There you go. Nice.
So this was one image. I just this is just the water. I just put the water in the tray and I didn't really put any intention on this one. I just wanted to see what the water what shape would come out. Let's see. So this is the one I did last week. So that's the image, and that's, to me, I feel like I could see the tail feathers here if I just go back and forth.
Oh, that's cool.
You know, I
So that
can feel
so
like I
you
can see it.
the technique you used was just a thin film of water, a quick freeze.
Yes. And this is the one I just now did. So I put this image and I put the image in the freezer with the water. And this is what came out just now. And I
Wow.
have a ohm symbol freezing now. It's probably gonna be ready in another minute. And I'll see how that comes out.
But
But
you used some pretty good water there, right? And
well, it's super imploded.
yeah, the imploder makes the water molecular cluster size smaller, meaning more responsive to external energy fields, hopefully. And
Yeah.
more stable.
But it's the only water I have available. So and it does have, like chlorine or whatever in it. But I did pass it through my filter many times. In fact, maybe next week. Oh yeah, next week would be great. I can show you guys before the class starts my setup, because I have the tri imploder and the super imploder, and all inside of a 50-gallon drum, and I circulate the water for like days before we even drink it.
That's spin dense, man. Spin dense.
Oh
See,
yeah.
you see that, everybody? So even though Veda Austin was unable to join us, we have Aircrete Harry. Thank you, Aircrete. That's gorgeous. Really gorgeous. So we see the principle right there. You wanted to see living water, guys. Thank you, Aircrete. And we'd love to have you say hi next week too.
And Maura asks if the hydrogen water changed the responsiveness.
What we have found is that hydrogen nanobubbles in water and in imploded water and in drinking water and in spa water famously is bioactive, is very useful. Actually, some of the most expensive spas in Japan are famous for their hydrogen nanobubbles. The reason we believe that hydrogen nanobubbles add life force to the water is obviously hydrogen nanobubbles are profoundly implosive, therefore centripetal, therefore negentropic, therefore dramatically increasing solubility and charge distribution. Hydrogen nanobubbles in water are profoundly helpful for all kinds of healing issues and hydration issues, drinking and bathing. So hydrogen nanobubbles are absolutely magic. There's lots of ways to do it. We have a hydrogen nanobubble we drink here. Now, whether they help this process that Emoto and Veda Austin were doing, we could guess they probably would, but I don't know if we have evidence yet of that.
Dan, so this question is about water container in Victor's device. Did he have these made to spec, or could he pull off the shelf? Dan Mac asks.
You mean the vortex containers that Schauberger used, like the egg shape?
Yeah, sitting on top of the upside down flask sitting on
Yeah.
top. Was that spec made?
Well, he had a wide variety of them and custom made most of them, I'm sure. There are people in Australia, our friend, are making these, they call them amphora now, which are giant egg shaped. And if you adjust the slight porosity in the ceramic, there's enough slight weep that it has an auto cooling that allows a vortex of natural sweeping evaporative cooling that not only becomes a natural fridge, but creates a natural temperature vortex. So the amphorae engineering, it was Phil Sedgman in the Flowform lab there in Byron Bay, but other people are doing these amphorae, very giant, beautiful eggs, and our friend Claudio there in Torino. Schauberger got the angle of the throat of the vortex optimized, and we now believe that is related to the 60-degree angle, but is related to the vortex angle of the heart itself, in my view. So obviously Schauberger had very useful intuitions, although I don't think he really understood the physics that well, but his intuitions were fabulous. We have an article on Schauberger translation, fractalfield.com/Schauberger translation on that. But
So
Thank you.
Melanie asks if you have an imploder device that can serve the whole house from where the water line comes into the house. That's the imploder.com. Jason also wrote the link on the chat box.
yes, and next week we'll have lots of more pictures. We just didn't get them ready today. We could, but we'll do that next week. But yes, Jason and I are partners, the imploder.com and fractalwater.com, and that project is growing exponentially as Jason has new investors and partners. And so in addition to the 3/4-inch super imploder, which has been available for some time, we've improved it, but now there is our 1-inch solid stainless high pressure commercial rated ultra imploder. You'll see it at theimploder.com and fractalwater.com. And both the super imploder and ultra imploder are designed for whole house distribution. Absolutely. The piezo charged vortex water molecule exiting the capacitively charged piezo vortex into the strong centripetal magnetic field creates a shredding action that dramatically reduces molecular cluster size and thus radically increasing solubility and hydration. It's a beautiful, and the growth on plants, and so many of diseases are hydration issues. So absolutely, these are useful. The super imploder was somewhat limited. It was less expensive, around 900, but it was limited in pressure, probably 60 to 70, maybe 80 psi max. And the hammering of repeated turn and off can be an issue. Whereas that ultra imploder in solid stainless, the 1-inch version, is rated for very high pressure and virtually indestructible, and lasts forever. And now, Jason, with our new investor partners, we're developing 2 and 3 and 4-inch diameter commercial imploders, and we'll be talking about that in depth next week with Jason Matozo and myself for large-scale applications of these. And that this has tremendous applications. Our new funded project to clear a lake almost as big as Lake Erie in the Philippines, we plan to use imploder vortex, large scale, and then insert the piezo rock powder and the effective microorganism. That when you take a charged rock powder, you put it in a pyramid or in a therapy, and so you have implosive, capacitively charged piezo rock powder, very fine, highly charged, very high. You hold it in your hand is tingling. Now you sprinkle that in a muddy puddle or a small pond, and you will find a dramatic increase in sedimentation rate. This was pioneered to some extent by Plocher.de, Plocher.de in Germany, and they were doing this for years. They were using a pyramid to zap the rock powder. So you have charged rock powder, and you put it in the muddy water, and you have a dramatic increase in sedimentation rate. Why? Because the charge makes the water centripetal, and it will eject that which least fits the matrix. So increased sedimentation rate is the beginning of most forms of water treatment. Now, if you combine that with the vortex nozzle, and you combine that with the famous Austrian, Japanese, what's called EM, effective microorganism, the compost pile that's smart enough to run the farm. Have you seen those pictures where if you have a huge and super happy compost pile, then the plague that's going over all the farms in the neighborhood, that plague just seems to jump over and doesn't infect the farm that has a happy compost pile. The reason is that compost pile is running the farm. I mean, the microwave coherence field of the compost pile is running the farm and deciding what microorganisms can come in and out. So when your compost pile is happy enough, it runs the farm for you. That's the joke. But the truth is, you combine the effective microorganism with the charged piezo rock powders and the vorticity, and we have some major projects to clean up huge bodies of water. You can read some of that work we're doing with large bodies of water purification at redstaregg.com. And you can read more about that at fractalfield.com/redtide-solution, where we combine that water treatment technologies with the fact that in the bodies of water in the Philippines, like maybe a third of the beaches on the planet that have been poisoned to the point of 300% cancer rates by what's called a red tide, which is dead water. The oxygen is gone from the water, and then this highly poisonous red algae forms, and a huge percentage of the beaches on the planet are about ready to kill you. Well, that's called the red tide. And if you take that algae, several 100,000 tons of it, which is part of our project, or in the case of the Philippines, there's a particular water hyacinth. They've got about 1 million tons of this wrong water hyacinth, making the water in this lake almost as big as Lake Erie, so thick you can't even take a boat in it. And so if you take several 100,000 tons of the water hyacinth or the red algae, and you then use the secret magic enzymatic catalyst, or the catalyst, during the pyrolysis, you make enough hydrogen to end the energy problem of the whole country at the same time you're solving the water problem. That's called fractalfield.com/redtide-solution. So the hydrolysis makes hydrogen in such vast quantities. First, you have to sun dry the water hyacinth or the red tide, and then the correct pyrolysis procedure. And Jay Dubinsky, our leader, redstaregg.com, is expert, studied for years with the Latvian engineering on catalyzed pyrolysis for hydrogen creation. So there's a whole bunch of dramatic environmental solutions combined with the imploder for large-scale water cleanup, and we're deeply involved in this conversation to be continued.
We have a question from Bob Sim. I have a question regarding stainless steel and water. I have heard them talk about how steel is bad for charge, and I'm wondering how that would affect water. I have a water filter that has stainless steel container. Does it prevent the water from gaining charge, or does it bleed charge? Also, how much effect would a stainless steel kettle boiling spring water have?
Let's be clear that in all of the vortex devices that Schauberger did magic with, and that we did magic with in Dolly and Jonathan's implosion research lab there in Plymouth, UK, the wall of the container is critical. In most cases, it was a ceramic, what would be called a high dielectric. And a ceramic high dielectric wall for a water vortex is wonderful because the capacitance can build. Beautiful. Now, in some cases, there was success with some of the platinum group metals. So a thin film of gold, or they used a thin film of silver in some cases in the, I think it was 30,000 RPM vortex there with Jonathan and Dolly, that they got that vortex to generate implosive, incredible capacitance. It is true, however, that a metal, a conductor that doesn't serve either high dielectric or high capacitance function will in general deplete the charge of the water. It's simply true. Now, obviously, the metal that probably would be worst or bad would be aluminum or steel. This would be really very bad. Now, stainless steel might be a little bit better. At least it's not going to, release corrosive metals into the water, that you're at least not releasing atoms into the water, but still your capacitance isn't going to grow as much. So it is true that if you want capacitance in your water, you generally need a non-metallic container. I mean, the canopic jars where you turn the water into wine, you can bet there was no metal there. Hell no. And so the capacitance of the water, ancient containers, they were ceramic, they had high dielectric, they would allow the capacitance to build. Now, today in the modern era, well, you have some metal here and there, but actually, I could give another practical example. In the trials we did in UK to determine how long you could take that imploder.com water and store it, and you still have an effect on seed germination. We made some measurements. And the short summary was, you could store that spin dense solubility effect in water for maybe 3 to 6 days, but probably not for weeks. And then the further variables were checked. And in general, we believe that mechanical shock, that high temperature or high pressure, or the presence of metal decrease the ability of water to store charge. And it's obvious why. So if you want to keep water alive, it needs to be cool. It needs to be probably out of the sunlight. It should be in a non-metallic container. And you should avoid high pressure, and you should avoid shock like a hammer. These kind of things deplete the molecular coherence in the water. So it's rather understandable and simply predictable electrical engineering how to keep the charge in the water. Now, I know most of the devices you use today, you use stainless steel pans in the kitchen. Well, but I think if you tried the right ceramic pans for a while, you might find your food actually tasted better.
How about a copper bottle?
Well, yeah. So, there's actually supposedly kind of a list of from good to bad. So, if you want to store water in gold or titanium titanium, gold or palladium or platinum, would that be wonderful? And copper, well, that's, not as bad as. And then getting worse is the stainless, and then horrible would be steel, and awful would be aluminum. Because obviously the water is going to remember the electrical geometry of the surface of the atom it's touching. And aluminum is fatal. Okay, was that a happily ever after? How are we doing?
Okay, one more question. This is from Jen from the Lucid Dream team. Then can you also talk about natural healing waters from node points on the land that become sacred due to their anima loci, the soul of the place?
I was there at Lourdes once or twice, where you look at all the people who didn't need their crutches anymore, and the Lourdes water is absolutely highly charged sacred water for sure. And it is true that water in a very powerful natural spring can be profoundly healing. Absolutely. For a dozen reasons: phonon coherence, trace mineral coherence, dielectric constant, implosive capacitance. The list goes on and on. Magic water is absolutely real, absolutely possible, and absolutely measurable. And the sacred spring is a very real and necessary. The thing that's shocking is that as civilization has crawled around the world, leaving messes everywhere, healing sacred springs are getting to be more and more rare. And that tells you something, as we have Saint Michel de Quicha on the Michael line here on the pilgrimage of Compostela. Very magical. Okay, was that the happily ever after? So remember, this was an improvised replacement for the fact that Veda Austin, we think that Veda Austin probably misunderstood the time zone. We don't know what happened. We're sorry, and we do apologize, folks. And we recommend Veda Austin's .com and her famous films and her work. Wonderful. We did attempt to talk about that to some extent tonight, and we decided to have some fun anyway, since we were all together smiling. Do we have any last questions or comments there?
Yeah, I just shared the scaling of the fractality of the materials from fractalfield.com on the chat box for anyone who is interested. Another question is, Dan, can you talk about the physics of Wilhelm Reis Cloudbuster?
Oh, yeah. Well, are we young enough to have that conversation? So let me tell you a short story. So there I was teaching about Ophanim Enochian at Dahani Wahu's Sacred Cherokee compound there at the Sunray Meditation Society there in Vermont. And then Dahani takes us to her backyard where she's been, well, I won't say shooting down the CIA helicopters, but she has these concentric metal tubes and she sticks them in the living water and puts holes in the clouds all the time. Dahani Wahu, the Cherokee shaman, amazing lady, really. We had fun together for years. Anyway, so the concentric tubes put a hole in the cloud because implosive capacitance does what's called conditioning the space. Visualize Joe Cell, he had concentric metal pipes, implosive capacitance, and the water through the center would be so capacitively implosive that there would be instant hydrolysis and the car would run on water because the hydrogen would jump out of the water because the pipes were so profoundly concentrically electrically implosive capacitively. Now, Joe always said, well, I got to charge the air in the building for 20 minutes to condition the space. What did he mean? Well, if you ever walked in a cathedral, the stones have been there for centuries and the space is electrically conditioned, which is to say implosive, which means you can hear the echo. And a perfect echo is more than symbolic of the perfect echo electrically, which is immortality defined. So conditioning the space is one of the things that happens when you align the concentric pipes for implosive capacitance, and then you're projecting a longitudinal directionally. So effectively, the water vapor uses the seed of that centripetal force to trigger the onset of precipitation. So the same reason a child with lots of twinkle in their eye, standing hopefully barefoot in the mud, can focus on a cloud and put a hole in it every time. The physics is that the reason the hole forms in the cloud is because the charge, the focus of that child was so shareable and so grounded that it created the seed of centripetal force, the physics of precipitation as defined both in magic and in rainmaking. So that's, yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. Veda is coming in 5 minutes. And well, if we still have time, maybe we can still do a 50-minute presentation with her. And my suggestion would be we end the recording of this one and like create 2 separate videos from this lecture, one for Vedas and one for our water talk. What do you think?
We can play with it. We'll have fun, but
Sure.
Veda's welcome, of course. While we're
She's
waiting,
here in a couple of minutes.
yes, great. But Daniel Zaluga has a question. Hand
She's
raised.
here already.
It's funny you said Zuluga because I actually had a lucid dream in which, Dan, you were walking up the stairs and you kept on repeating Ulu Aga, because my last name is Zuluaga. And then you were saying Uru Asa LM, and you were saying Uru Asa LM, and then you were saying Uru Aga. And I was like, what in the world? And I woke up from that. But anyways, I was going to ask, why the concentric tubes, and is each concentric tube in golden ratio proportion to the next concentric tube for optimum?
Yes.
Yeah, go.
The columnation depends on the diameter of the tube in exactly the same way the Kozyrev mirror metallic tube diameter actually had a frequency measurable in the microwave. And if that frequency were golden ratio times Planck, and therefore charge collapse implosive, that Kozyrev mirror would have more telepathy. So the diameter of the tube has a very predictable key frequency. And if the concentric diameters were tuned well to Planck fire and charge collapse, then you could indeed create that implosive centripetal capacitance necessary to trigger emission into the longitudinal array. So diameter critical, tuning critical, and even the material of the tube, there were certain plastics that were more microwave coherent and certain metals that had more microwave coherence. Trevor Constable's book, Weather Engineering on the High Seas, has many examples. For example, the 60-degree cone there was the most effective in rainmaking, which we now know is implosive capacitance perfected. So it's really necessary to make measurements in the microwave to understand what's happening with those concentric tubes, actually, because microwave implosion is pretty much a definition of Kundalini once you understand how we measured Kundalini in the spine liquid using microwave. It's quite a rich conversation.
Dan, Veda is with us right now. Would you like to welcome her?
Yes, Veda Austin, we missed you. Hello, hello. Where are you? Oh, yes. If you could unmute, Veda. Veda, would you unmute, please? Just find the mute button down.
Sorry, I was on another page trying to find some things to show. Thank you so much. Sorry, Dan, for being late. I was asleep. I think we got the timing wrong, and you've also had a time change over there, and it means I'm even further away.
What time is it in New Zealand now?
It's just turned 8. It's just past 8 o'clock in the morning.
I see. We missed you. Well, all right. So we had a little fun. We talked about Emoto a bit and water. But if you prepared a presentation, why don't you share your slides? Go ahead, please.
Yep.
Please do. Yes. Can you share your screen?
I can. I'm sure I can. Let me just have a look.
Just find this screen share option there.
Yep, I've got it. I'm just going to pop it up, the one that I've got. I'll just be 1 second. I'm just trying to decide which one to show. I think what I'll do is actually show my latest bits out of my latest book, because there's so much in there that actually I think is really helpful for people to see more about my work. And we'll kind of like skip to a few things I find interesting. So,
by the way, we love your accent. It's so wonderful.
well, thank you. Okay, now let me go over to here. It's a bit like watching paint dry whilst I'm doing this, but anyway, there we go.
Share screen and you choose which screen to share.
Yep, that's fine. Okay.
So we actually had Dan Mack show some examples of crystallizing water. Oh, there you go. Go ahead. Go ahead, Veda.
So what I'm showing you, I will just go past here as well, is that there are a number of things. This is from my actual new book. Nobody's seen this. And I because I'm just running so late and I have about 3 presentations I could show, I actually know that you guys, a lot of you are familiar with my work. And so I like that. So I want to show you some of the new stuff that you can kind of expect to see in my work. So I've done a lot of work, as for anyone that doesn't know me, with crystallography. So I've discovered the specific stage of freezing, which is, I call it the kind of stages in between. And I think that's where we find a lot of the secrets, because I always say the secrets are in the subtleties. And so it's a stage where there's liquid on top and ice underneath. And I tip the liquid away and I photograph the remaining crystallography. The time for it is about 6 minutes. So it is not a solid, it's more of a liquid crystal. And I think that this happens due to light. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but I'm going to show you some of the pictures that I've got in this book, and then we're going to go through to some areas that I think a lot of people might find interesting. I have a whole chapter on frequency, and I think it's really nice to see how frequencies can impact water and how water responds to different frequencies and to different music. So some of this stuff people may or may not have seen, but this is about facial recognition. So many people would have seen this photo, but a lot of people wouldn't have seen what I have done prior to this photo, since this photo had been done. So this I did many years ago, where I was very curious, since I saw water over and over, like to pick up on imagery and design an imagery. But over the years, I've discovered that water communicates, if you bear with me with that word, in 3 ways. A signature pattern, which means that we can identify the type of water it is based on its patterns, an artistic expression like you're seeing here, as well as a hydroglyph. Now, a hydroglyph is what I've just called a symbol in ice that I need to have seen the same symbol appear at least 50 times using the same word influence. That's writing a word, putting my dish of water on top of it for 30 seconds only, removing and freezing, and seeing the same symbol appear using the same word at least 50 times, like I said, then I have 1 hydroglyph. There is a lot of repeatability with that, which is very rare in the water world.
Yeah,
And
replicability. That's good. Science.
that's what science would like to see.
Mhm.
And so for each one, I have multiple examples in a separate thing. I can show you what they are. But what I do have is around about 44 hydroglyphs. And each hydroglyph, each symbol, has multiple meanings attached to it. What I mean by that is if I use, say, for example, the word chemical, and I might see a symbol for chemical, but if I use the word pharmaceutical, I'll also see the same symbol. So we see multiple meanings, but they're related, attached to a symbol. So with this is the process. It's kind of nice to be able to see it. So this was the result from using my friend's picture. So then I thought, what happens if I show water this? Well, it designed the negative. And then after using the negative, it reduced even further to a really different, interesting kind of face. So what that showed me is that, well, firstly, it's not a random thing, because when you actually put those two over the top of each other, they're extremely similar.
Wow.
So I'm going to whiz through some of this because there's lots of pieces to my book. It's quite big, but it's
Wow.
nice to get a bit of an overview of the different faces that I've got here. This is a really interesting picture because I asked a woman who was pregnant to sip some water and then leave me the rest of the water. So I froze a little bit of the rest of the water, and this was the image that I got. And this was the ultrasound she sent me the next day after she went to have her ultrasound done.
Wow.
What I observe when I see embryos, and this has become almost a hydroglyph because I've seen it so much, but it's a very unusual one in that it's not a symbol. I guess it is a symbol, but it's not. I haven't used words. We've used pregnant women or people thinking or trying to get pregnant, and we will see this shape of the spine and the head of an embryo, but it's always in light. There's always light, this white light area, which I find really interesting.
Beautiful.
You might even notice the hand down here in white because she
Wow.
was imagining holding her baby.
Amazing.
This was my very first ice image when I used to freeze water solid. And I have not done that in over 9 years. I think a lot of people don't quite realize that I'm not freezing water solid. I think that the stage of freezing is so important to know about because it really makes the clarity of the images so visible. It's like a quantum leap from the old time where this is still amazingly clear. But when you compare it to some of the other work, you'll see it really is quite kind of extraordinary how different they are. Now, this is a great example of water and hydromancy. So I put my thumb into the water, and you see it designed this thumb with a very clear nail, and that's all interesting. But at the end of the nail, you might see a chip. Well, I chipped my nail, my thumbnail, exactly the same place 3 hours after doing this.
Wow. After.
After yeah, after. So I've seen this multiple times, not only in the future but also in the past. So I don't think water is limited to realms or time or space. This one I used the word milk. I wasn't actually thinking about, well, human milk, but it designed the place where the milk comes from a human. I thought this was really extraordinary.
Wow.
So this is some of the work you may or may not have seen. There's a lot of new stuff in my book where I've been working with a lot of ancient mysteries lately, and people who work in Egyptology and have been doing documentaries. And so I used 2 different Egyptian little statues with the Atef crown. Now, here's what's quite interesting with this is that you can see for this one, it designed the crown, but not the face. And I'm always interested in that. And I wondered, well, I wonder why it didn't show the face. It's just really, really interested in the attive crown. Now here, I did this one and I let the water melt and then I refroze it. So I'm using the same water, and I've done this multiple times throughout my book where I'm actually using the exact same water to see how long an imprint lasts for. So this one here, you can see it designed the crown again, and it was the same water. Now, the additive crown must be something of significance for us to be seeing it. I know that water is never random. So it's very understanding of the animal kingdom, and some of these people would have seen. And I think it's really nice. And I love this one, which is of a bee, because that was the influence. For people to see the process, like it's very simple. I pretty much killed my my printer. It no longer works. We have done this so many times, and I don't just use pictures. I use words, thoughts, I use media, I use music. Here's another one where I've let the ice melt and refroze it, and you see that it's still within the memory of the water. Now, you can only do this melt and refreeze approximately 8 times, depending on how much water you put in. If I know I'm going to do a lot of melting and refreezing, I add a little bit more water in. The process requires some tipping of water, the tipping of water out. So that's why you get less and less water as you go. So there's little stories about this. This is an interesting one. I think it tells a story on its own. So here we have a picture, I've outlined them both on the right, of what looks like 2 pigs. Now I want to look at the detail of the pig, because you can even see the wiry kind of bit at the back, and his snout is very clear with his mouth, and I don't know what this black thing is, and even the eye and ear. But if you look closer, there's another one below it. So this was from somebody had sent me a video. I don't even know why I would watch it. I think probably it was, I didn't realize what was going on, but it was of this pig that was being taken to an abattoir or the meat works, and it managed to escape. And the video was of the pig escaping, and it was fine in the end, and someone ended up saving the pig. But what interested me is why I saw 2 pigs and not 1 pig. And I think that you see one very clear pig at the top, but the one down the bottom is very likely what water, quote unquote, saw, that was also wanting to jump out with the first pig. And I've seen this also multiple times where water shows me things we can't see, or we don't see, or we don't think it sees. And I don't think that the water lens is limited in the way that the human lens is. And I think that it can't be if it is related to not being stuck in time and space. So
I mean, because the water showed you the past and the future several times, sort of simultaneously in the image. So obviously it's a bigger context.
Absolutely. So I'm going through now. This is an interesting picture. It might not seem as interesting as some of them, but the influence was a picture like a starfish, and a starfish. The starfish is here. You can see that it has five legs. Okay, the most common pattern for water is a 6-sided star. It doesn't naturally make 5-sided anythings.
Right.
Not like this. I think this is a very, very good example of water actually taking on information and doing something it would not naturally do.
Amazing.
Okay, now I'm going to whiz through. So this is all of these, really a massive body of water to show that this is not random work. I think that this is important. And what we're seeing right now is the imagery, right? So pictures, but we'll just move on a little bit from this, although I do think this is an interesting one for some people, because I would suggest that water reads potentials. So here, and I've done this with sunflower seeds, I've done this with flax seeds, and I've done it with an empty pistachio shell, and we'll probably whiz through. Now, I don't know how much time I've got, but I realize it's probably late where some people are. But here we've got the seed that I put in, and this was the apple that I got the seed from. Now, this is the direct outcome of freezing the water, and it designed the apple. Now, then, just to get the things right here, so I let that melt and refroze it a day later. So this is a day later. And then I let it melt and refroze it 3 days later.
Wow. I think Apple Computer has a new logo.
Maybe it does. Now this is just fun for people to see where I'm putting physical things in. And I put physical things that are man-made things mostly. Obviously, there's a crab claw in there, which is not man-made. But I was curious, like, we're seeing, you understand that nature knows nature, but what about things that we've made? But of course, if we're all bodies of water and everything has water within it, every living thing, then what we create is also understood by water, because the water mind is there, and we've also have inspiration through water, just not maybe the liquid water that we understand. So as we kind of go through, this is another example of water picking up information around it. My influence, and this was from years ago, so my influence was this butter knife. I do so much work in the kitchen, and I often just use things that are nearby. I have an everything drawer in my kitchen. I get something out of the everything drawer, and I think, okay, let's see what will happen. But the influence was this knife. I wasn't even looking. These were not the influence. They were on my kitchen table, but you can see that water picked up on them. Multiple different examples of playing with water around a guitar. And you see all the different viewpoints, which I think is great to see that there is some consistency here. Now, I can... So this is an interesting one. Okay, so we're working with eggs. I'm very interested in working with eggs because they hold life, or the potential of life. And you can see some consistency within the way in which they form in the ice, and same with pyramids. But here's a really interesting one where I collect, well, I used to collect my eggs from someone I knew. And so they're free range at my friend's place. And so there was always the off chance that one might be fertile. But you don't know if they're fertile until you crack them open and you look at the yolk. And if there's a little tiny dot thing on the yolk, then it's fertilized. So what was interesting about all of them that I did prior, you saw the shape. But for this particular one, after cracking it open, we saw that it was fertile. Whereas water knew that before I did.
Nice.
This is all film, which we'll just go through. And I think what I'll do is I'll just go down to a few pages that I think that you guys might find really interesting. Going to leave something for you to see. So there's a lot of the science there, but that's a lot written. I do think this is important.
Veda, where can we find your book from?
Oh, you're getting the sneak peek. It's not out yet. It should be out in about a month to 2 months.
And what's the title of your new book?
The Living Language of Water.
Aha, okay, we'll look for it.
Thank you. So what you're seeing here is what looks like light coming out of weird spear things. Okay, so what I've observed over the many years now is when you open the freezer at just the right time, as the ice is forming but hasn't completely formed, what you see with the naked eye and photograph and video is a light that emanates out of the forming ice. Once I was speaking to an Indigenous woman, and she said she could speak to bees. And she said that the bees were just, she'd watched their hives for long, long periods of time. And one day a bee communicated to her in some way and said, we don't mind you looking at our hive, but please don't look at it for so long, because your conscious expression is putting too much light in the hive and we like it to be darker. And I found that really interesting, because it suggests that where you put your conscious expression is where you put your light. And I
Okay.
actually think it's potentially light that paves the way for the design of the crystallography, because water, as you know, is a container of photonic light.
All right. All right.
So there's a lot more to that.
Beautiful.
But I've really enjoyed some of these studies. I don't know if you ever have heard of some of them. His name's Rene Pioch. He's a scientist. And he did this really interesting study using little chicks that were just hatched and this weird little robot that he made. Now, this little robot is on a number generator checker that allows it to move. It's on little wheels. And all it does is it's got a pencil underneath it. And as it moves around, it just moves randomly. It's not designed to move in any specific way. It just randomly moves around this little box thing. And it makes these little pictures. So then he had some chicks hatch. And the first thing they saw was this little robot. And so they bonded to the little robot because chicks like fall in love with what they see first that's moving. And so this little robot was moving and they fell in love with it. And they thought it was their mum. And so what happened was fascinating. And he repeated this multiple times. The chicks, their love literally made the robot come over and stay over there where they were. It only made little designs near where the chicks were and left all of this open. And when they did this with rabbits and the rabbits were afraid of the robot went back to being random. And when they put a light on the robot, a little candle on the robot when it was dark, the rabbits liked the light and they drew it near him and they drew the robot over to them and it stayed there. So what's interesting about this is consciousness, or even, loving consciousness, having an impact on something. We might think that we couldn't have any impact on robots, whereas in fact what we're seeing here is something quite contrary. Now this is a man by the name of Gennady Krokalev. I talk about him a lot because I find him super interesting. He was a scientist and also a psychiatrist. And without going into all the detail that's written here, don't feel like you have to read it all. This man was introduced, he was Russian, and he was working with psychiatric patients, and he had heard about this idea based on another article that was in a magazine, that the retina of the eye, is able to pick up information and share that information holographically, and that holograph can be picked up by a camera. So he got something called a Zenith camera, which is what you can see him working with here, that has this kind of box thing. And then he got these, looked like scuba diving goggles, and he took the lens out of the goggles. Now, to find anything much on Gennady Krokalev is difficult. And you'll understand why as we go into this conversation. So the people he was working with were having visions, they were having hallucinations. And so what he did was that he would photograph their retinas, and when they told him what they were seeing. So he would say, just let me know when you're seeing something, when you've got a vision, when you see someone or something. And so then he would take the photo. And he did this actually in a really more gentle way than you might imagine. And I've seen a video of him. It's long since been taken off the line now. But what he was able to see was that the photos that he took, they were able to see the visions that his patients were seeing, which were confirmed by them. So of 200 patients, 117 were able to confirm that the photos he was taking from the retina of their eyes, or from the projection of their eyes, were in fact the pictures they were seeing. Now I'm going to show you 3 of them. They're extremely difficult to find. Sadly, Gennady Krokalev, he rang his brother. 3 hours later, his brother came over to his house. He'd rung his brother to tell him that he'd just made a huge discovery and that would change the world. And then when his brother came to him, he was found hanging. and all his work was confiscated and made confidential. So the pictures we're seeing up here are Gennadies. Now up here it says reindeer, antlers in Russian. This is the obvious face, and this says snake. Now that's all in Russian. So relatively recently, within the last 25 years, more Russian scientists gave this a go. Instead of using people who had psychiatric disorders, they used someone who could remote view. And the scientist stood behind a wall and held up numbers and shapes. And as she tuned in to what they were holding up, someone took the photo. And this is their setup. This is this woman. They've used a scuba diving mask and same kind of camera. But these are a couple of examples of what she was projecting, what they photographed from her eyes. So there were two conclusions with this, or two suggestions, should I say. One was more popular than the other. The least popular was that there is a secondary realm of consciousness that was being picked up here, some kind of other realm that maybe dogs and cats can see. The second, which is most popular, is that the brain sends information to the retina of the eye, which is mostly very ordered, structured fourth phase water, and then it rearranges it into picture form and projects it out like a hologram that can be photographed and seen. And we're familiar with things like orbs being picked up by the camera, the sensitivity of the camera. But I think that this is very interesting. So all the scientists actually made a documentary. All of them tried this, and the documentary is called something like Thought is Material, It's Proven. It's in Russian, but there is one with English subtitles. And I think what's interesting about this is that the key to have imagery in this particular experiment that they were doing was that there be a very clear visual picture in the mind. This was the work of Marcel Vogel, and he was an IBM researcher. And why I talk about this is that a lot of this is in relation to my work. Now, what this little chart is showing here is that he became really curious about the impact, that thoughts might have on plants. And he used a polygraph with the plants, attached it to them, and found that they responded more to the thought of being cut or burned or torn or hurt than to the actual act itself. And he discovered that if he tore a leaf from one plant, a second plant would respond, but only if he was paying attention to it. So the plants seemed to be mirroring his own mental responses, and he concluded that the plants were acting like batteries, storing the energy of his thoughts and intentions. And he said, I learned that there is energy connected with thought. Thought can be pulsed, and the energy connected with it becomes coherent and has a laser-like power. So
Veda, I happen to work with Marcel and Cleve Baxter both on that. The transducer was a form of a GSR, which is simple resistance measure, and leaf surface resistance was the variable. And yes, we could imply that it was the longitudinal component of the thought that was actually being received by the leaf, which had to do with some of the crystals he was using to project it. So it was very useful. Cleve Baxter wrote greatly on that as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's great. It's always super helpful, because I always thought that Marcel and I would get on great. I've always wanted to meet him, but sadly I missed out on that. Now, this was something that a friend of ours, Dave Rossi, wrote for my my whole paper. So for this book, sorry. And he's just talking about how this is working from a quantum physics perspective, potentially. Which I just actually would like to get through to some more of my newer work. But I do think this is a particularly interesting example, which you may well be aware of, but perhaps some people are not, which is called the phantom transference. It's called phantom transference. So there was, I'll just try and make it a little bit bigger. an experiment where well, here you can see it's actually several sections of leaf were taken out of a living leaf. And one section was placed into a high frequency electromagnetic field. And rather than seeing an image of the dissected part, which you would expect it to, a visual image of the entire leaf appeared, less the dissected parts, lasting for 10 to 15 seconds, and was recorded on film, this is a screenshot of the film. And so they called it phantom transference. And what I find interesting about this is that it seems to be very relevant to people that have had amputated arms or legs. I have a friend who has an amputated arm and always talks about feeling like the arm is still there. I think there is a subtle body, if you will, and I think that subtle body is held within the electrical charge of the body as a whole that surrounds us, regardless of whether we have a leg or an arm, whether it's been amputated or not. I think that water in the air, the fact that we breathe out, and this is just me and my thoughts, the fact that we breathe out suggests that there is water in the air, and that water in the air is attracted.
The phantom leaf effect was originally measured with Kirlian, and the evidence here would suggest that the residual capacitance, which was measured with the Kirlian array for the phantom leaf, is related to what you're measuring with water, which in my view would be components of the longitudinal array. So it fits together beautifully.
Right. Well, what I was saying is I think that the water in the air is attracted to electrical charge. And I think that actually the fact that we have electrical charge gives us an entire web of information around us that's giving information of ourselves and of the external world, which is brought then into what we would term as intuition, which I think is also a watery world, which is able to receive that information as a feeling, as a almost foretelling at times.
It's nice that you mentioned Peter Garriev there. We work with him in Budapest, also the Garriev group.
Yeah, I try to mention all the people best that I can within the work that I've shown because it's important. This is just more examples of the water reading potentials. So rather than seeing the seed, we see the outcome of the seed. And here, but using an empty pistachio shell, I see just the shell and not the tree.
Huh.
You may be familiar with the Bigglesine brothers. And if you're not, I would say that they're very interesting. So their father started this work. He was an eye surgeon. And I'm going to go back and read some of this to give it context. I won't read the whole thing, but so, and his son and two sons and daughter have taken over the work. So Dr. Bigglesine was taking blood from capillaries, and these vessels were only big enough for one red blood cell to fit through at a time. Since the images he was seeing in the blood were much larger than red cells, he concluded that they couldn't be physical, but actually holographic in nature. These visible holograms represented physical, energetic, and emotional blocks or stagnations, displaying the root causes of people's imbalances. Now, this is how they wrote this for me. I've got permission from them to share this, and I think it's really interesting. So they said that when a structure in the terrain is distressed, it changes its frequency. This is the interference field. The body's background energy field or biological hum becomes a reference energy source. The two fields produce the basic conditions required for a hologram. The hologram appears when a beam of light is split into and reflected into a single photographic plate, and the blood with its own energy field acts as a photographic plate to record a holographic image of the distressed structure. Now, their dad passed away and sadly was very persecuted throughout his career when he was talking about this topic. He was an excellent surgeon, but he when you start talking outside the box, you often get a little bit torn down. So here are just some images that they gave me. Now, if you know anything medical, as a lot of these people clearly did, and his father certainly did, you can start to really make out that these aren't random images. There's not random pictures. So up the top, we see an image of a broken femur. They're seen as a drop of capillary blood. But this, interestingly, is similarly to my thumb picture. This image was seen a month before the actual break.
Wow.
Now over here we see an image of an injury to the brain. And the cranium and neck is taken from a drop of blood. Client had fallen on the ice and hit the back of her head and was just discharged from the hospital before taking the image. The image seemed to indicate a hemorrhage. And when they went back to hospital, the hemorrhage was confirmed. Over here, we see an atrophied kidney. And over here, this image of a leg and foot was taken from the blood, asked the client if there was an injury to the leg, and they confirmed it. And I just want to have a look at the actual detail in here. It's just really remarkable. And this is like the intelligence of our liquid fluid body system. The water knows the past, present, and future. And we're seeing this again shown in this work. And I think this is quite extraordinary.
So the blood was like a hologram of the mirror where there's almost a phase conjugate mirror in there as well. It's gorgeous.
Yep, really, really cool. Now, this was an interesting one, and I mean, please let me know when to stop because I can actually talk for like 12 hours nonstop. Now I'm awake properly, but I can wrap it up soon if you like. But
another 10 minutes or so anyway. Go ahead.
And if we can leave like 5 minutes for questions, that would be great.
Absolutely. No, sure. Well, this you might be going, oh God, what am I looking at here? Well, what we're looking at is we're kind of a mold, really. And why is this interesting? Well, I used to go into schools and work with and do like a 2-hour project with children in relation to a combination of water science and art. Now, each child was given a bottle of water to drink from and to pour into a cup, which had a little lid, and they would write their names and what they were thinking about. So they projected a thought of something they liked into the water. Now, on this particular time, I was in my daughter's classroom, and so she was there as part of the whole project, and there were about 22 children in the class. Now, because there wasn't enough room in the freezer for me and the children to do it at the school, I took all of these samples home. Now, when I got home that evening, my daughter was starting to feel a bit unwell. She started to get a bit of a cold and flu or something. And so I ended up focused on her. And it was a week before I got around to doing the crystallography of the children's waters. Now, I do want to add that they would sometimes add little natural food coloring into the water for a fun project for them, which some did and some didn't. And that just gave it more of an artistic approach. So we could see the structures slightly differently and a bit more clear. Anyway, so the water was all just sitting there for a week in a box in a dark space, which is the best way for me to make sure that the water stays as clear as it can. It's very sensitive to the sun or sunlight or artificial light, so we kept it dark. Anyway, when I pulled them out and had a look, I noticed that there were 3 cups. When I took the lids off, there were 3 cups that had a kind of algae or like mold growing on the top, on the surface of the water. And I looked at it and I was like, thought that was a very strange. Why were there only 3 and all the rest were perfect? And I ended up taking photos of the mold. And it was fascinating because for all of the children that had projected some thought, 90% of them, their images looked like their thoughts. There's always 10% that aren't really paying attention. And so what was fascinating is that the mold had molded to the conscious expression. So the boy whose this was, the mold had molded to the shape of a dragon. That was what he was thinking of. This is my daughter's. She was thinking of a happy face. And the other one, I just can't find the photo, but the other one was thinking of a hippopotamus. And when I told the teacher, what she told me was even more interesting. She said, oh, which children had the mold? And I said, oh, my daughter Shanti, but she's been away because she was sick. And she said, you know what? The two other children who had the mold also have been sick. They were sick for the last, the day after the test when you came and a few days after that. So what we're seeing is that the water grew a mold on the children who we didn't even know that they were sick, but the water responded in some way, and there was this mold that grew on their water. But the mold had literally changed into the shape of the thought. And I find that particularly interesting.
Wow.
That's just too long to get into. This is about different cultural perspectives on water. This is from my own culture, different imagery that we see relative to the thought. This is just water taken from my tribal water, the Waikato River, and it very much looks like the face and the little beard and the way that they pull their hair back up in the olden days, the old Maoris.
So you have Maori blood?
Yes, my father is a native New Zealand Maori.
Aha.
Yeah.
It's in the blood. Cool.
It's in the blood. Yeah, I just recently was on a documentary, and they were asking about my heritage. And on my father's side, it's Maori on his father's side and Scottish on his mother's side. And I don't know how many greats to go back, but quite a few great-grandfathers back. My great-great-great, however many great-grandfather was called Olaf the Black, and he was the king of the Isle of Man.
Ah.
Okay, so this is showing something from 100 or so more years ago. So I took some water from an area where there used to be a lot of Maori settlement, and I got that ice picture on the left. And when I looked at that ice picture, I thought, you know, that really looks like a pātaka, which is what is on the right. A pātaka is a Maori food storage hut. They would often store water in gourds, and they would store them in there. And I went looking through historical records, and I ended up finding the sketch of what the area looked like from where I took the water, and I'm comparing them here. There was two pātaka, one behind the other, and if you even notice over here, there's another one behind it.
Wow.
I found that fascinating.
Gorgeous.
And this is about water and spirit. So if water isn't confined to time and space, why can it not connect to spirit? My mother died in 1999. She was my best friend. And during this work, I had been missing her. And so I don't have anything to lose by trying this, but I said, Mum, can you connect to my mum? And so to put this in context, I used to live in Japan, and Mum and I would write letters to each other. And at the end of every letter, my mother would make some attempt at making a circle, and she'd do a little heart inside. And Mum's circles always looked like the map of Australia. They were so bad. And so we had many, many, many wonderful times together. And so when I first did this, I had absolutely no idea what water would show, if it would show anything. But I asked water to connect to my mum. And this is the very first photo that I got, a misshapen circle with a heart in the middle. And then every year on her birthday, I would ask the same thing, and I would get the same response. But this year, because her birthday was in January, I said, could you please connect, to my mum? And I was also thinking about my sister, who was also missing her. So if we zoom in, there's actually another little circle with another heart in the middle. So there's two.
Wow.
So it's really interesting. This was my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my direct grandmother. Her name was Revis Bentham Green. She was quite radical of her time. I never met her, sadly. And she had remarried. She divorced my grandfather, remarried, and she was going to go to Barbados for their honeymoon, which was quite a big deal back then. It was very expensive to fly. She flew from England, where she was born, and they flew to Miami, and they were on this plane down below called the Star Ariel. And the Star Ariel went down over the Bermuda Triangle. And when my mother was on the day before my mother's 8th birthday. So I was always curious as a little girl growing up about what happened to her. So I asked the water, and I put the water on the article of my grandmother's missing plane. And water designed this for me.
Oh,
And I've always found that this is extraordinary because it's unlike so much of what I would see. And to me, it very much looks like a vortex or some kind of portal.
wow. Oh, that's intense.
And so a lot of what I talk about now with my ancient mystery stuff is trying to look for interesting designs that water will show me, and in response to pictures or questions about the ancient world. This is a very interesting thing I've recently found out about. It's called ITC, which let me go up to here, stands for Instrumental Transcommunication. So there's a man called Hans Kenneth. This is his website here. And what he believes is that these watery faces, and how do you get these? So first of all, you need a silver pan or aluminium foil underneath a glass dish. And then you disturb the water, you move the water, you have a light coming in on one side, and you have a camera that takes the photos 1 to 3 photos a second. And this was taken by different people. This man here particularly has the most extraordinary body of work. And so Hans, who is from Amsterdam, he believes that these watery faces are of spirit. And he shared that some faces have even been verified as historical people who have been passed away. He has the most comprehensive website you've ever seen. It goes into so much quantum physics, so many different details, so many examples. When I first saw these, I have to be honest, I thought, because I've seen some others that look even more realistic, and I thought they weren't real. So I left this alone for years, not really thinking that this was a real phenomena until I tried it myself. We're looking at the book now. I'd have to go to the other presentation to show you what I got, but I got this amazing hand in the ice when I tried, not the ice, the water. And, you know, I kind of, it's an interesting one. I started to see faces, and since showing people this work on my last Ancient Mysteries webinar, loads of people have been showing me the pictures that they've been getting. There is something to it. I can't exactly explain it, but there's something there. And I think that this kind of relates into the concepts of water divination and hydromancy from the ancient Egyptians and the Greeks. So very interesting. This lady,
we're teaching that coherent longitudinal interferometry is the beginning of the physics of clairvoyance, where you see ancestors, and to be a media within which to perceive the longitudinal array, water is perfect. So, you know, ancestor memory concepts fit rather well with what water can be an antenna for.
Well, I often think that ancestral information is held within the amniotic fluid and passed through into the child from there. Because I did that big study on eggs, based off this concept that eggs are holding ancestral information and more information than we think they are. And this one was from a lady who, her mum had died. This was the first time she ever tried my technique, and she didn't think there was anything there, and she looked a little closer, and she got the words God. Now, this is about dreams and the subconscious. And interestingly, with dreams, I would put my dish of water beside my bed with the intention they capture some part of my dream. And then in the morning, when I woke up, the dreams I'd forgotten, because of course, if I remembered them, I could project. The dreams I'd forgotten and tried to remember, you know, that feeling, and then they'd disappear, I would freeze that water. And the imagery that I saw that came out was so unbelievably clear that it would literally jog my memory of the entire dream. And so I recorded all dreams and recorded all pictures. And I did this when I was actually living in Langs Beach in a very rural kind of area in a beautiful place right by the beach, but very secluded. And you can see this looks very much like railway tracks. Well, I dreamt about railway tracks, the butterfly. This was from the movie Sweet Tooth. Here I was dreaming about sheep, surprisingly enough. But you go through them and you hear the stories and you see the clarity. And some of the dream imagery, in fact, a lot of the dream imagery that I got in the ice was clearer than what I get in the daytime, in the wake state. The reason I was doing dreams, because I was trying to think, does my consciousness, is it affecting the water? But then I was thinking, well, it's impossible to take consciousness completely away because consciousness also relates to your connection. So I was thinking, well, what about subconscious? When I'm dreaming, I really don't know what's going to happen. So this dream, I dreamt that I went into a cave and I was standing on a rock and I was looking down into water. And what was interesting, even in the dream and unusual in the dream to me, was that there was a fountain down the bottom underneath the water that I knew was from the fountain of youth. And I hadn't gone there to take the water from the fountain of youth. I'd gone there for another reason. Now, what's interesting is that when you tip this picture upside down, you see this fountain I was seeing that was under the ground. You see the cave entrance with the moon and in the stone. So there's something within the subconscious that water is very easily able to pick up on and depict in real life. So I go into all of the different dreams I've had here and what they were and why they were interesting. And this is about water and God, going into the idea that the hydrogen is the spirit of water, and that plasma is the mind of water, and that physical water is the body that houses the spirit of water, and that the idea that the sun is hydrogen, and when water is evaporated, it's like the source taking its children back home, if you will. This is kind of a big chapter.
That's how we started the conversation tonight. It was about the physics, the fractal physics of hydrogen being the heart of the implosion.
That's so interesting. Well, I'm just trying to get to the frequency part, which I think you might find interesting.
Yeah, we wanted to do a few questions at the end here, just a few anyway, with Tufan. But your book is so amazing.
Thank you. Well, these are just about prayer. So seeing how this is using tap water as the control, and then letting the tap water melt and refreezing it, and then letting that melt and refreezing it. So we look at this disordered structures, and then we see the patterns that have formed afterwards, and we see that the patterns hold. And this is from different types of prayers. The others were indigenous prayers. These are different religious prayers, and then healing energy, and then Reiki energy. And then what's this one? Oh, this is the difference between after you put a very angry, frustrated energy into the water, how it disorders the spring water. Goes on and on and on and on and on. But we will stop. We have to stop somewhere, and I'll stop there for now.
That was fabulous, really fabulous, Veda. Amazing, gorgeous.
Thank you.
That was mind-blowing. Thanks a lot for the beautiful presentation.
Beautiful. But do we have a few questions we want to do? It's getting late, but
yes. Well, actually, we have a lot of questions, but I'm going to ask a few of them. So first one, Maura asks, does using hydrogen water change the reactivity in the freezing image precision?
We talked about that a little bit before. Remember that you didn't play with hydrogen nanobubbles, did you, Veda?
No, but actually I have been sent a bunch of hydrogen water by so many people, and I have frozen the hydrogen water, and we do see consistently that the hydrogen water tends to form the six-sided hexagonal patterns that I would normally see in spring water. And what's interesting to me is that the hydrogen packets that I've been sent, they were sent in like these very specific kind of there's a plastic outside, but a kind of a metal-y thing like inside. So the water was kept in the dark, which was helpful, but it has been sent all the way from America. And to be still seeing hexagonal patterns within the water after it's gone through such a lot of time is interesting. So I haven't done lots more with the hydrogen water so far.
Hydrogen is implosive. It's very powerful, and a whole lot could be said. But let's go on to the next question, Tufan.
Sure. What is the best way to replicate the water experiments?
It's very easy. I teach heaps of people, and you can learn it for free off my website. So the best way is to go to my website, which is just vedaaustin.com. Then I called this technique CMP, which stands for Collective Molecular Photography, mostly because I think that the water is working as a kind of collective and we're taking photographs of it. So you just have to get a glass petri dish. If you don't have that and you can't wait, you can even use a glass Pyrex dish. You just have to use a glass dish with a flat bottom. There's a ratio of how much water you want to use. So if you have your dish and you tip it slightly, you want to see 1/4 pooling and 3/4 empty. So if you're using a 10 centimeter diameter petri dish, which is about the size of my hand, that's what I like to use, you'd put about 2 tablespoons of water in it. It's literally just covering the base. Then you might inspire it in whatever way you want, or you might, what I always suggest for people learning is to learn your organic patterns of water. If you don't know what your organic patterns of water are, or your signature patterns of water, you won't know if they've changed. So you need to, this is not all about you. I know that's so hard for us to hear sometimes, but it's actually, it's an invitation to a relationship-based conversation, whereby we get to invite water to share about it first. That's a nice way to start a conversation. So get to see what it looks like, get to know the pattern. So you put the water in the freezer. I use a regular freezer. I've brought my temperature down to -16 degrees Celsius, because that seems to be what most freezer settings are at, because I teach this online so much. I love having it at -24 degrees Celsius, but I wanted to make it so across the board I was able to teach people in their own freezers. Then what you want to do is put your timer on for 5 minutes and 20 seconds. Now, if you open the freezer and you see that it's still liquid, close the freezer and give it 2 more minutes, and keep on doing that until you see liquid on top and ice underneath. If you're looking for that ice and you think, oh, I don't know if I'm seeing it or not, you can see it with your naked eye, but you can get the light on your phone and shine it in. You'll see what's going on in there. Once you see that there is liquid on top and there is ice underneath, then what you want to do is take the sample out, tip the liquid away, wipe the back of the dish, and photograph a backed out photo as clear as you can, and then go in at any areas you find interesting, photographing it just a little bit more zoomed in. Do it as quick as you can. The ice will melt very quickly, but it's as simple as that. There's nothing, it's not even, basically free for people to do, and I have literally thousands of people sharing their work with me. You will see one of 3 things. You will see a signature pattern, which in my PDF in my website, if you wanted to get it for free, no problem. Just put the little word blessing in the code as you check out, and it's free. And that's always there. And so it's a step-by-step telling you how to do it all. And so what you will see is a signature pattern, and I have examples of that. Then you'll might see art, like you've seen with my work, and then we'll see hydroglyphs. And these glyphs, I have a hydroglyph PDF which goes through all of them and what they look like. I would kind of like to give you one example of a hydroglyph, just to give context of what you may well see. And I'll go into my hydroglyph chapter over here, and I'm just doing this all behind the scenes, waiting for it to load up.
I think the Steiner people called it sensitive crystallization process and sensitive crystallization in the blood. And, Steiner inspired a lot of that as well.
Yeah, Rudolf Steiner was absolutely incredible in his insights into so many things. Okay, so just to give an example, that this is what we would say, call a hydroglyph. So there are 64 examples here, and each one has a meaning. And what we're seeing here are examples of them. This is the message glyph. It means message. But when we see at the ends, some of them have hearts and some of them don't. When they have hearts, we know that they are loving messages. So let's just zoom in so we know what we're seeing is not random. So we can see, oh yes, there are very clear, very much the same symbols that we're seeing across the world. Do I only use English words? No, I don't. I have a team of people using words from all languages. Water isn't reading words, it's reading the energy of words and reverse engineering them back to some kind of living principle. And not only, and this is the information glyph, this is purity and enlightenment. This is the ring glyph, which also means marriage. This is completion. So we go through, and this is electrical charge. It also means salt. This is also something we might see in seawater, in regular water, and even in urine. This means to climb up. The very first one I ever got after using music as my influence, this is conception. Then we go through and go through and go through. So just to give a context of what a hydroglyph is, so you also might see hydroglyphs. So you'll see a signature pattern, artistic expression, or hydroglyphs. Hydroglyphs essentially are symbols we can start to actually piece together and understand, which is mind-blowing because we're able to actually understand this language of water. But not only that, hydroglyphs are not only something that you can photograph and start to try to understand, you can eat them. The stage of water, of very specific freezing, is highly structured and ordered. It has taken on the information, it is in form. At this stage, we're at a fourth phase stage where it's pushed the solates out and it has become, it's more like a liquid crystal. And so it is the purest form of water at the stage of freezing that you're ever going to see. The reason water clouds over when it's a solid is because of all the salts and minerals. If you want a pure, clear ice, you could use distilled water. But what I'm working with is water with salts and minerals. I think that's what helps water to store information for longer. So at that stage, you'll notice that my work is very clear. There's a lot of light coming through, lots of colors coming through because of the background colors. The ice is very thin. My children taught me this. When my daughter was little, I was holding up the dish and she asked if she could have it. And I thought she was just going to look at it. She started to eat the ice. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "It's good for me, Mummy." I was like, "Oh." And then her brother did that a few weeks later, separate to her. And then I was sharing the technique with lots of parents. And they say, my children, they eat the ice. And I'm like, "Really?" So did mine. And then my husband, who's very adventurous, and he started doing a study on plant medicines using words, using my technique. And he wrote the word ayahuasca. And so he put the dish of water, froze it, and he took the photos and everything. We actually ended up finding a hydroglyph based off the work he did, which meant visionary based off plant medicines. But with the word ayahuasca, he started to eat the ice afterwards. And after a week of eating ayahuasca ice, after a number of very lucid, crazy dreams, he would say to me, "I think I really need to take this kind of seriously. There's something here. I'm feeling something that I wasn't feeling a week ago." And so then I started to share this with people. And so then people with illnesses started doing this, with certain sleeping disorders. So it seems that people with sleeping disorders are very common. So the word will come out of the well of knowledge within you. It might not even seem like it has anything to do with your ailment, but you'll know what it is. And if you can't sleep and you write the word rest, for example, if that's the word that comes out of you, and doesn't even matter what the crystallography looks like, and you eat it, and you do that each day. I've had every single person who's done this for sleep come back to me and said they've started sleeping. I had a woman with very serious issues after a vaccination. And she could hardly walk. I did a whole live with her on Instagram, and she couldn't hardly do anything. One of the things she tried to do was movement therapy, where she's moving her arms and things and trying to really do the inner work. But she ate the ice as almost religiously every day for 9 months. She had a list of words this big that she showed me. And she noticed improvements each day as she started to do that. But not only did she notice physical improvements, and she now has a clean bill of health, but she noticed that the water, which was the same filtered tap water that she was using the entire time, was tasting sweeter. She noticed that the crystallography was getting more and more and more beautiful every time she would do it, until her relationship with the water was so strong that she had developed the relationship with water inside of herself that had helped to also heal her.
Wow. That's
Great.
that's so beautiful. So
Veda, have you tried obsidian or shungite in your experiments?
Yes, yes, I have. I've done lots of stuff with both, but the one that's coming to mind with shungite is that the patterns were more complex when the shungite was beside the water rather than inside the water. Found that really interesting. I found that when a lot of people want to drink the shungite water, so they put the shungite in the water, and what we've seen is that that brings the pH of the water down a little and makes the shungite and makes the water taste a kind of lemony taste. Whereas if you put the shungite beside the water, it has a very big, almost bigger impact on the water in a very, very positive way. So that's what I saw with that. I've done a lot of things with different crystals. Also, we've done one with a very rare type of crystal called Yemingju, which is one most people have never heard of. And I have been fortunate enough to have it. It's also known as Dragon's Pearl. It glows in the dark. And when it is seen in the daylight, it looks like a very basic kind of jade, but it's very, very special. And it's got all this phosphorus inside of it that makes it glow, and it can glow by being exposed to light, being exposed to boiling water, and being exposed to energy, chi energy. And not only doesn't just glow for a little while, it glows for hours and hours and hours and hours. And one time I had mine on the side of my bed post, and a very, very big, scary, I'm just a baby sometimes, with a big, scary electrical storm. And I woke up, and I used to live right on the beach then, and I had the curtains open, you see all this activity going on. It literally felt like there's something really happening in the air that could have been extraterrestrial to me. That's how it felt. And then I looked over at my Yemingju, and it was pulsing, glowing. I'm like, oh God, what's happening? There's something happening here for sure. And it was given to me by someone it was given to them by someone in the royal family within China, within the aristocracy there. And so it's mostly only found in China. When they find it, they build big palaces and temples on top of the area. The biggest one found is this giant, like meter by meter ball that they made it into. And I think it's worth $1.3 billion. It's one of the most rare crystals in the world. And it is considered dragon's pearl because the Chinese believe it to come from dragons and be ethereal.
I think that was so fabulous and wonderful. I think our audience is really getting this is a lot later than we usually go. But Tufan, was there any last thing for Veda? So Veda, people can reach you at vedaaustin.com, right?
Absolutely.
And you have a YouTube channel. Was there any last thing there, Tufan, or how do we do?
Well, we have a lot of questions, but just maybe last one. Could this technique be used in medical diagnosis?
Mm-hmm. I have a chapter on the diagnostics where I've put, and I encourage everybody. I try to get everybody to do this because I can't do it all myself. And anyone can do this. It's not just me. So one example I'll give is where I had a stomach ache, And many of you may or may not know, I was in a really horrendous car accident 24 years ago. We went under a 7-ton truck, rolled twice. The driver was instantly decapitated. It was one of the worst accidents in New Zealand where someone lived. Over the course of the many, many years, I've had 8 surgeries. I managed to heal myself really well. I'm very well. But the only thing I can't digest very well is one particular vegetable. So, and I don't eat it. I don't eat that vegetable, so I don't tend to have any problems. So I had this crampy tummy ache. So I put my petri dish of water on top of my tummy, and then I froze it. And in the dish were images of very clear carrots. And I rang my friend up who'd made a casserole. I said, "Were there carrots in the casserole?" And she's like, "Yes." I'm like, "Oh my goodness. Okay."
Diagnosed the tummy ache. That's so good.
Great. It was really interesting to hear about the effect of shungite when it is placed behind the dish, that it serves as an amplifier, because we are also using the shungites in one of our transducers in the Piezo Fire project together with Patrick, Bodie, and Dan. And that one serves as a regulator instead of an amplifier. So it's fascinating to see the properties of the
Yeah, shungite is a super dielectric, which can be a lens where the implosion or conjugation is enabled, where the sorting happens, so where the things come to focus. So super dielectric is relevant to what's focused from the water. So that's a very fun conversation. And this was just speaking of fun conversation, obviously we could go on, and it's a tragedy to have to end this, but God, you're wonderful, Veda, and we encourage people to stay in touch, and we will have to do more with you.
Yes, thanks so much, Veda.
Oh, I'm so sorry to everybody. I was late. I think the timing was, I had you down for 1 in my diary, so I was completely off, and I woke up. I haven't even done my hair. It's a complete mess. So thank you for accepting me just the way I am. It's always a pleasure, Dan, and thank you so much to everybody for being here. I'd love to hear what everyone else does with this, because for me, the more important thing is I share my own work, but I'm very, very excited to learn about what other people do. There's so many brilliant minds and hearts out there. And this work, it's in its infancy, really. There's so much potential.
And your enthusiasm is so fabulously contagious, Veda. It's wonderful. Thanks.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody, guys. Blessings.
Thank you.
More fun to come. See you soon. It's been such a blessing. Bye-bye.